and welcome back to another YouTube video. It's been a while since I did my last one, but to be honest, I just haven't had a chance to sit down and do this video, which I'm doing today, which I've been wanting to do for a while since I had the idea, really. Now I can finally sit down and I can talk about this with you. So today's video is going to be about Cornish folklore and Cornwall in the fantasy world in general. I was born and raised in Cornwall, which is a magical little part of the UK. It's down that tiny little edge bit down the little corner at the bottom of England. And we are also one of the Celtic regions of the UK, including Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and obviously the Republic of Ireland as well, even though it's not part of the UK, and the Isle of Man. We're all Celtic regions, so we have our own language, although it's very scarce nowadays, and we have our own flag, we have our own regional national bird, if you ask some Cornish people who believe we should be a separate country, but I'm not going to get into that today. Today I am purely talking about Cornish folklore and myths, as well as that in the fantasy genre, because in the last year or so I have seen a mini surge in fantasy books exploring Cornwall. Not so much Cornish folklore, that's not quite got there just yet. There is some crossover obviously, but there's been more books set in Cornwall, which I absolutely love. I think it's crazy reading a genre that you love, like for me, fantasy obviously, and it being set in the place that you grew up and recognising these either environments, if it's just a fictional place that they've created inside of Cornwall, or if it's a place you might actually recognise. It's just so special to me whenever I've read that. So I wanted to talk about that with all of you and share two things I love. Did I say that already? I might have said that already. Anyway, I'm a bit excited. So there's also a lot of Cornish myths and folklore that I don't think people realise, that are quite world renowned as well, even though they are sort of retold, that I don't think people realise actually originate in Cornwall. That's also so cool. So I'm really excited to share this with you, and hopefully it's something that you find interesting, and if not, that's okay too. This is just my little way, as I always say, to vent out my thoughts. So where do I begin? Cornwall is, like I said, magical. It's anyone who's been here, it is arguably one of the most beautiful places in the UK. It's just, you can feel there's an ancient sort of magic in the air. That's the only way I can describe it, and I'm so lucky to have grown up here. But you might recognise some myths I'm going to mention today, even though they're retelling. So for example, in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, I haven't read the books, I must admit, but in the films, I'm not too sure which one, anyone who's watched them, if you recall, there's a scene where they're in lesson and the Cornish piskies, which is what we call them, but otherwise would be usually referred to as pixies or fairies, but usually pixies, but we call them piskies, and in some areas of Cornwall they're actually referred to as pigsies. But yeah, like I said, in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, we meet Cornish piskies, and I remember the first time seeing that, I was absolutely gobsmacked, because I couldn't believe that such a massive, world-renowned, universally loved series mentioned a bit of folklore from my tiny little part of the world. So that was just super crazy. And then another one that you might recognise is Jack and the Beanstalk, which was originally Jack the Giant Killer. So Cornwall is also known as the land of giants, and Jack the Giant Killer originated here in Cornwall. So if you don't know, we have a place down near Penzance Way called St Michael's Mount. I will put a picture somewhere. But back in the day it was referred to as the Mount of Cornwall. So the story behind that is, I'm just going to lay it out roughly, but this is like the main well-known story of it, is they were holding a meeting in the magistrate's court about the giant who was inhabiting the Mount of Cornwall, and that he was just causing too many problems for the folk of the town and the villages nearby. So they offered a reward in gold for anyone who could kill the giant. Jack decided that would be him. So obviously in the infamous tale, he goes up the beanstalk. However, in the original Cornish folklore tale, he spends the night digging a massive hole on the mount, and when the next morning he taunts the giant to come down, he's covered the hole, so the giant can't see it, and the giant's name is Cormoran as well, the giant of the mount, his name is Cormoran, and Jack lures him down, the giant falls in, and once he's in there, Jack jumps down and on his head with a sharp object. I don't know what I can say on here or not. Sorry, I feel like I'm fiddling loads. Sorry. And that is the end of Cormoran, and Jack then becomes known as Jack the Giant Killer. And in his fame, he goes on a journey and he visits other courts. He starts making a trip to Wales and through the Cotswolds to Wales. And I can't remember the exact places of his journey, but along the way, other giants hear of this infamous Jack the Giant Killer, and they go and try to see if he can best them, and he does. But you can read into that. So I just want to give you like general overviews of some of these things. But yeah, I just think that's such a crazy one that I always see. So I've got a really itchy nose today. I think it's because spring's coming and hay fever, and I get it so badly. But yeah, anyway, Jack the Giant Killer, the giant named Cormoran, and I think in total there were 6 giants that he slayed. But that is where the original tale of Jack and the Beanstalk comes from, which I just think it's so cool, especially when you see all these adaptations and all these different retellings of Jack and the Beanstalk. It originates again from Cornwall with Jack the Giant Killer. So back to Piskies. Piskies are arguably one of the most infamous tales in Cornwall. They're described as being no bigger than your thumb. They have weathered faces and little beady eyes like mice. They wear red caps, brown jackets, and black shoes with little silver buckles on. Now, Piskies, the best way to describe them is they're known for being mischievous. They're not outright bad or nasty, but it follows a lot of similar tales. If you're into folklore, it follows a lot of similar rules with the Fae. So you don't interrupt them, you don't thank them. They usually are around the kitchen or farm of areas or steadings or anything like that. So it's also on the in Scandinavian folklore you have tontu or nissa or anything like that. So it's the kitchen household sort of creatures. That tends to be where they reside if they reside around humans. Now, one of my favourite forms of the Piskies are the moorland pixies. So we have Bodmin Moor, which is a big moorland, and they're said to inhabit there. So the pixies of the moors, they're known for stealing horses and riding the moorland ponies and riding them away and all over the place across the moors. They will knot little stirrups into the horses' manes, and then that's when they ride them away. And at night, they're also said to be seen with small lights around them. So these are also called night riders, I'm sure it is, night riders, but jack-o'-lanterns as well. That's where that also partly comes from. So that is the Piskies on the moors at night who are carrying their small little lights to get around. They are also known for leading people astray. Now, there's a saying in Cornwall which is when someone is Pisky-led, which means they've been led astray or their mind it's not quite on the right thing. So they're said to have led wanderers and people walking across the moors into places of thick fog or deep marshes, so that they lose their bearings and can't really find a way. But again, this generally refers when they have been displeased, isn't it? Sometimes I go, when I talk, I go, especially when I know it's to a camera, I go completely, not illiterate, that's not the word. Anyway, let's skip over that. But yes, that is a saying in Cornwall to say that someone is Pisky-led, and it does still get used to. I still hear it today, which I do think is really, really cool. Now, also another thing you might have heard or you might not have heard about Cornwall is that we are known as Land of the Saints. We have so many saints. They're not obviously all celebrated, but there's so many different churches all dedicated to different saints. And the patron saint of Cornwall is St. Piran. But that is obviously because of the Christianisation of Cornwall. And as I said, Cornwall is a Celtic region. So it does share a lot of similarities, particularly with Wales, and there is some crossover in folklore with that as well, and sometimes Ireland too. And pre-Christianisation, so we have a lot of holy wells in Cornwall, and arguably the most famous being the one on Holywell Beach. Holywell Beach also is a place that you might have recognised from a lot of shows and movies. It gets used for shooting a lot because it does have an infamous sort of rock known as Gull Rock out at sea, and we always spot it from a mile away when it's on a show or TV or anything like that. So I used to do surf lifesaving, and we used to do our runs down to the end of the beach, and in there's a cave where the holy well is. So back before pre-Christianisation of Cornwall, the holy wells were known as Piskey wells, and the Piskies were said to have been the protectors of these wells. Now, on the subject of Christianisation and in Cornwall and Piskies, it's also said that the Piskies used to be the gods of Cornwall. So like I said, obviously we were a Celtic region, so just like other similarities with the Celtic regions, we had multiple gods. Now, it's really difficult to get a lot of information on the pagan gods of Cornwall and what they used to be before Christianity took over, because of the language barrier. So obviously, like I mentioned, we have our own language, and there also wasn't much or hardly anything written. So by the time that Cornish people had learned to speak English, there was no written word because it had died. It's very, I know I'm explaining this poorly, but basically there was nothing to be translated because it wasn't written. And then as the Cornish language near enough died out, it struggled to then be translated. So we don't have very much information on the deities of pre-Christianized Cornwall, which is really sad. I've done a lot of deep diving and there is some information, but it's such a shame that we don't have as much information as we do, and say over in Ireland with their Celtic gods and goddesses, same with Scotland, Wales. But there is a few, maybe that's something for another day. But anyway, as I was saying, it's said that when the Christians came to Cornwall and began to spread Christianity, that the Piskies at the time were not Piskies, they weren't these thumb-sized things, they were gods, they were giants, again, land of the giants. But they were shrunk upon being splashed with the holy water from the holy wells, which were once the Piskey wells. So there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of different myths and folklore, and again, I think it is a little bit difficult with Cornish folklore because so much, I believe, has been lost. We still have a lot, but in comparison to other places, arguably we've lost a lot of it, which is such a shame. But there's just so, let me make sure I'm not going. Let me try and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Yeah, they were night riders. Still the Moorland ponies. Yes, obviously. Oh yeah, so they were also famed for sneaking into tiny holes, like keyholes or gaps in windows of households to find anything sweet to eat, which I can't really blame them for. I think I'd do the same given the right thing was in the house. So I'm just trying to make sure I don't forget anything because I've been wanting to do this for ages, and sometimes when I get overexcited, stuff falls out of my brain. Again, like I said, with a lot of fae folk and fair folk in other folklore, there is the usual changeling babies that occur as well. And if I'm right in remembering, I can't remember if that was Piskies or not that do that. I might be wrong on that one. I can't quite remember. But sorry, my notes are also all over the place. And their preferred, it's said in a lot of myths that their preferred mode of transport is actually on the backs of snails. I just love hearing stuff like this so much because it is like the fairy tales that you grow up hearing about or listening to, and it's sort of what you picture was it like at the bottom of your garden when you're little. So I absolutely love anything like this. Also said to be seen tending crops. So like I said, they are really farm based as well a lot of the time, and they're said to be tending crops under the moonlight. And if I remember rightly, but it's only under a full moon, I think, from what I can remember. I think that is everything on Piskies. Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure I had that all down because obviously they are one of the biggest ones. Oh, and I didn't have this written down actually, but I do remember as well that they are also, the sound of their chatter is said to be the same as hearing a hive of bees, which I think is really cool, because now whenever I do hear that, all I can think about is that maybe there's piskies around, which is really, really cool. But yes, and obviously I've covered Cormoran and Jack the Giant Killer. So I don't think I'll ever truly get over how crazy it is when I hear these big tales or these adaptations of what are originally Cornish folklore. And on stuff that people might not realise is originates in Cornish folklore are spriggans. Now, I've seen spriggans in like recent years. They're in a game, aren't they? I don't know what the game is, but I remember seeing them. Is it one of the Elder? Is it Elder Scrolls or Blade or something like that? I know there's spriggans in that, and there's spriggans in a few, I think, like things like Dungeons, I might be wrong, Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And obviously they're brought up in all sorts of places, but spriggans, again, they are something that originate from Cornish folklore, which I don't think a lot of people know. And spriggans, however, unlike piskies are said to be mischievous, but they can be helpful. Spriggans are said to be downright nasty. They are irredeemable. There is nothing good within them. And they're sort of, if you imagine them with a much big... Oh, this is where the changelings was. Changelings was spriggans, not piskies. They're said to have heads that seem far too large for their bodies. Very thin, like straggly limbs. A bit like... I don't know how you'd explain it, but you get the picture. They're not pleasant to look at, and they're not pleasant in nature either. But so they would change their ugly offspring and in place take a human baby, and the human family would be left with a big-headed, ugly spriggan child. They are also said to be the protectors of cliffs, cairns, and dolmens, which are big, like ancient tombstone type things, and also this protectors of ancient burial sites, which they believed to have treasure in. So they would guard that treasure, and that treasure was for them. But there's a lot of other stuff on spriggans. Like I said, it never tends to be very nice. But I just think that's so cool, because I can't help but when I see someone mention a spriggan, I'm like, that's from Cornish folklore, and you probably don't know that, that's crazy, but that's also really cool. Now, okay, bear with me, I've been talking so much. So, arguably one of the biggest parts of myth and folklore that surrounds Cornwall that is known worldwide, and that is Arthurian legend, that is King Arthur. So we have the ruins of a castle called Tintagel here. It's not that far away from where I live actually, and it's a stunning area. So if you ever are in Cornwall, when you ever get the chance to visit, I would highly recommend. And this is said to be the birthplace of King Arthur, and where he also held court sometimes. And if you go to the ruins, you can actually walk down the steps if it's low tide onto the small cove that is at the bottom of the ruins, and in there is Merlin's cave. So there is a lot of myths to do with King Arthur here, but that is the main one, that he was born in Tintagel Castle. Now, there's also a myth of king, or myth/history, there's always crossover with Arthurian legend, isn't there? Of the last king of Cornwall, I believe it was the last king of Cornwall, but King Mark of Cornwall anyway, he sent one of his court members in his place to retrieve his new bride, Isolde, and the person he sent was Tristan. So if you are familiar with Arthurian legend, you will know that Tristan and Isolde is known as one of the greatest love stories to exist. And upon meeting Isolde, Tristan and her, they fell in love and defied King Mark of Cornwall, and they sought refuge in King Arthur's court. But I just think it's so cool how there's so many... Oh, I just love it. It just makes me so happy. And also, not far away from Tintagel as well, slightly further inland, there is a place called Dosmary Pool. Now, there's a few myths with Dosmary Pool, one of them involving a woman called Jan Tregeagle, which I would recommend searching up and looking at all of these, because there's always alterations, as there is in any folklore and myths, to do with these things, and they are very interesting reads, especially as it's not something that you hear about all the time. But Dosmary Pool is the main myth to do with that is the lake in which the Lady of the Lake from King Arthur's legend resides, and it is the lake which Bedivere returned to and threw Excalibur in to reside with the Lady of the Lake. Let me make sure I haven't forgotten anything else. Oh yes, so obviously it was said Tintagel was said to be the home of Uther Pendragon, considering that was his dad. Now, I know that what's it called? Glastonbury is said to be Avalon, but Camelot is rumoured to be either Tintagel or Camelford Castle. Camelford Castle Kilbury, which is... I can't read my own notes. What have I written here? Don't know what that means. I actually don't know what that means, what I've written. Sometimes I think, I make a note and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll remember that because I've written it in some weird shorthand or note that I think future me is going to understand. And I never do, so I don't know why I keep doing it. But yeah, it's rumoured to be either Tintagel, Camelot is rumoured to be either Tintagel or potentially Camelford at Castle Kilbury. And it is mentioned in some folklore that is where King Arthur did hold court on some occasions. We've got Merlin's Cave, which is the secret hideaway, Dosmary Pool, which is the home of the Lady of the Lake. And yeah, I think that's all I went into with that, because there's just so much with Arthurian legend, because it arguably is so big and it does span quite a large area of the UK, mainly sort of Cornwall up to up to Somerset into Wales sort of area. That tends to be the circle in which the King Arthur legend resides most strongly. So what else? Knockers as well. So I will get onto the books, by the way, but right now I'm just sharing some Cornish folklore with you. Do it in a minute, Emmy, do it in a minute. Sorry, I told you I go off track. So knockers are, or Tommy knockers are a part of folklore and myth from the mines. So Cornwall is very infamous for mining, specifically tin mining, and to this day, if you walk along the cliffs and the coastal paths, you will see a lot of abandoned mines. And Tommy knockers or knockers are known to be spirits of the mines. Now, there's differing in opinion whether they are good or bad. So some miners saw them as a good omen, and when they could hear knocking, they believed it was the Tommy knockers either warning them that something was wrong with the part of the mine that they were in, and it was either going to collapse or it would lead them to a good strain of tin ore. And then my nose is so itchy. And then there's also the other side of it where some miners believed that if you could hear the knocking of Tommy knockers or the knockers, that was them purposely trying to cave the mine in. So there is differing opinion there, but as a whole, they tend to be known more on the good side. I'd say I've seen a lot more folklore myths surrounding that they are helpful. However, they're also another creature that you don't want to annoy. Cornish pasties, which we're famous for, they were developed for miners, and a lot of the time they would leave little bits of pasty as offering to the knockers as a thank you for helping them down in the mines. And whilst we're on superstition in the mines as well, the miners also believed that if there was ever a cat seen in the mine, that level would be cleared and the workers would not go back until that cat was he was no more. That was also and you also couldn't say the word cat in the mines. I don't know too much more about that, but it's the same, like, there's also another one with fishermen, because obviously we've got a lot of fishermen. My nan's husband, actually, their family has been in the crabbing and lobster fishing industry. Like, their family have been in it for over 100 years, lived in the same house for over 100 years. It's really quite incredible. But he was also telling me some of them. One of the ones is that you don't say rabbit when you're on a fishing boat. And on the subject of pasties as well, a Cornishman will never take a pasty on a fishing boat. So there's another little bit of superstition and folklore for you. But what we say, yes, the knockers. So yeah, there's a differing opinion on what the knockers do and are, and whether they're good or not. But I love that little one. I think that's a great part, especially because mining is so entrenched in Cornish history. So also, we'll go on to mermaids. Now, there are two very famous mermaids in Cornwall, well, famous for Cornish people anyway, which is the Mermaid of Zennor, which is arguably the most famous, and the Mermaid of Padstow. Now, the Mermaid of Zennor, there's a couple of alterations on that myth, but it basically revolves around what you'd expect of a mermaid, that she met a man from the land and they fell in love. They went away, they got married, they came back, and she then could come on land. There's a few different alterations of that one, so I haven't really gone too much into depth into that one. That's a really good one to read up on, actually. But the Mermaid of Padstow, the slightly lesser known one, if you have ever been to Cornwall, I'm not too sure if they sell it outside of Cornwall, but we have an ale here called Doombar, which is a Cornish ale, and the Doombar is a sandbar in at the beginning of the Camel Estuary, just outside Padstow Harbour, really. And if you notice that, if you've ever been there, or if you haven't, you'll never see big boats going in and coming in and out of Padstow Harbour, because they physically cannot get through. It's too dangerous for them because of this sandbar. A sandbar is where underwater, it's basically a mound, like where the sand rises. So the dog's just opened the front door. I've lost my train of thought. So basically, big ships with deep hulls, it wouldn't work. It doesn't work still to this day. And that is said that years and years and years ago in the myth, that there was a sailor or a fisherman, and we don't know the cause, whether it was through anger, heartbreak, love, jealousy, we're not too sure, but he shot the Mermaid of Padstow, and as she was dying, she set a curse upon Padstow and unleashed a righteous storm. And in this storm, the sandbar was formed so that no big ships could come in and out of the harbour. So that is what is known as Doombar, and that is how the Doombar was created. Again, it's just really, I just think it's so fascinating that such a small place has so much myth and folklore that a lot of people don't know about. I know I keep saying that, but I just think it's really cool. And then on the subject of sea ones, there is also one which is known as the Gannel Crake, which is said to be a bird that haunts the Gannel Estuary in Crantock, which is the beach that I grew up on going to every day. And then also we have buckers. Buckers are also, like a small creature said to have dark skin and hair made of seaweed, and they come out of the sea, and they are spirits of the sea. Again, I don't want to go too much into all of them now because we'll be here for ages. Now we've also got fae or fairies. So ants were also, it links. Ants are said to be the last earthly embodiment of fairies on this plane. So it's their the final stage of them being in an earthly body on Earth before they go to another realm or wherever it is that they reside. So therefore it was considered very unlucky to harm an ant's nest. And what people would do was they would put a bit of tin in into a ant's nest under a new moon, I'm sure it was, and that piece of tin would turn to silver, which I think is just really cool. I'm trying. Someone's obviously arrived at the house. So I'm trying to remember some of the also one of the ones in the mines is you don't whistle in the mines. And then we also have something that people would say you don't want to see in Cornwall, which is a white hare. So the white hare is said to be I'm so sorry about that. Is said to be the spirit of or a new form of girls who had passed away, who in life had been maltreated, and they would be there to haunt their betrayers. But that's just, again, it's just another one of the many, 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 many superstitions and myths in Cornwall. So, my God. Cats at all. I just want to make sure I've gone through everything that I wanted to speak about. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I haven't. Oh, my God. I haven't. I'm so sorry. And then we also have... so Pobelveen or Pobelveen are also a name for little folk, so fair folk, the small things that you typically get in a lot of folklores. And then also we have a lot of stone circles. So one of the most famous ones are called the Merry Maidens, and that is a ring of circles, and they were said to be it used to be that you weren't allowed to dance on Sundays. The church announced that you weren't allowed to dance on Sundays, and it's said that these maidens, these merry maidens, snuck away to dance on a Sunday, and not too far away there's two large monoliths as well, but they're not overly far from the Merry Maidens, and it's said to be that these are the fiddlers that were playing the music for the Merry Maidens to dance. But as the church bells and the clock struck 12, they heard it and they ran, hoping to escape their fate. But unfortunately they didn't, and they all turned to stone in punishment of dancing on Sunday. But there's all sorts of folklore and myth to do with stone circles here. We also have the hurlers, the Merry Maidens, the fiddlers, and there's a few others as well, but there's a lot of them basically. But now on to why I wanted to talk about this in the first place, which is books, fantasy books set in Cornwall or have a Cornish theme to them. So one that I read was an ARC that it's now published, but when I first read it, it was a e-ARC from NetGalley that I was lucky enough to receive, of Molly O'Neill's Green Teeth. Now that is mainly set around the Gloucester area. However, the main characters on their quest that they have to go on briefly visit Cornwall to a stone circle, and they have to complete one of their tasks there. So that was the one of the ones that I noticed Cornwall in. It's a very brief mention, and it's a very short stint of time in the book where they do it. But Molly's Green Teeth explores a lot of British folklore as a whole, and I would really recommend it. It's such a fantastic book, and it's just so much fun, and I was so attached to a green lake monster who eats bags of kittens. So I would definitely recommend. It's just a very light-hearty, fun read, whilst also having them elements that is really enjoyable in epic fantasy. It's a really perfect blend, and I absolutely love it. And it's only a short read as well, if you just wanted and a standalone, if you just wanted something to refresh your palette and something different. And then we have... What do we have? Oh, Midwinter's Tale by Lily Hayward. Again, that was an ARC that I got last year, and I read that. That was not quite as much fantasy as I thought there was going to be from the synopsis, but it's still a really enjoyable read set on a fictional Cornish island. And that's just reminded me, one more myth. Let me get back to the books. One more myth, which is the myth of Lioness or Leoness. Now, Cornwall, as I said, is right down in the very bottom corner of England, and then a bit further away, about an hour's boat ride away, there's a archipelago of islands called the Isles of Scilly. Again, absolutely beautiful. And years ago, this myth is basically like a Cornish version of Atlantis. So it's said that there was a piece of land there that one day became completely drowned by the tide, and there was only one man who escaped on a white horse, and whilst he was running from the rising tide, his horse threw a shoe. And to this day, in some Cornish family crests, you can still, there'll either be a white horse or 3 horseshoes. So that's one that still has sort of survived into today, especially the fact that it's on some family crests. But yes, that's sort of like a Cornish Isles of Scilly Atlantis type thing, which I think is really cool. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Lily Hayward's Midwinter's Tale. It was just, it's a perfect one I would recommend for reading in the winter. It's just super cosy. And like I said, there's not quite as much fantasy as I thought there was going to be. I thought there was going to be a little bit more magic and the like. But again, it's just a very easy, cosy read. And obviously set in a fictional version of Cornwall. Then we have, I'm going to do a author spotlight video, whether that will be on here or on my Tuesday Tea and Tomes reels on my Instagram page. I'm not too sure yet. But I want to do a spotlight video on this book, Megan Scott's The Temptation of Magic. So this is set again in a fictional version of, or a fictional place in Cornwall called Estwood, and it's beautiful. It's like a cosy, semi-dark academia magic vibe, and it's sort of like if you imagine Oxford in a small, very scaled down, in a small coastal town where there's cafes. Like I could smell the cafes and the pubs and everything. And this is also an urban fantasy, which normally it has to be done in a very certain way for me to enjoy an urban fantasy, because sometimes I feel like the magic can be sucked out because it's urban. But this was so beautifully done, and Megan has actually created a new kind of creature in this, which are the main creature known as Imperials, and these are creatures that basically rule over all other creatures. So for reference, the human world and the supernatural world coincide with one another, but the humans don't know about the supernatural world that include all sorts of creatures like selkies, fairies, goblins, like everything you could think of basically. But the ones that reside over all of them and control the population of the supernatural are called Imperials. Now, Imperials are these creatures that can adapt, and they also hunt other supernatural creatures, and they are able to adapt and change in order to defeat that creature. So it's very cool, very powerful creatures, and this was just perfectly done because it starts off, like I said, quite a localized, cozy, atmospheric feeling of where you are, and as the book goes on, especially at the end, you realise that, oh, this is actually going to be much bigger, and the world slowly starts to open up. And I'm so excited for book 2, which is Seduction in Blood. That might be completely wrong. Education in Blood. No, what is it? No, Seduction. I'm sure it's Seduction in Blood. Anyway, I'm very excited for that one, because I loved this book so much, and I actually really want to do a reread of this already. But I would highly recommend. And so our protagonist, Nicole, she is also a art history student, and her focus is on supernatural art, and there is real life paintings that are used in this book, which I think is amazing. And I actually have the LitJoy special, oh god, bear with me, the LitJoy special edition of this, which features one of the artworks that is heavily involved in the plot of it, which is, this is stunning. Let me make sure that you get this, which is look at this, the Wild Hunt of Odin. And this features very prominently in the plot of what Nicole has to do. And speaking of the plot, should I just read the synopsis? I think I might just read the synopsis for you. But it just has, everything was just so perfectly done for me that I really loved this. And if you want to read this at the ultimate time, I would really recommend reading it in the autumn. It's that sort of that sort of book. And also one of the main features is actually, I actually took the book to go and take pictures there, because it's not that far away from me, is Lanhydrock House, which is a big part of one of the orders that's in this book. So I'm just going to read the synopsis for you. As an Imperial, Nicole has the ability to kill any deadly supernatural, but if her power ever awakened, the Wake, the organisation that governs supernaturals, would force her to be their loyal huntress or kill her like they did her mother. To stay safe, Nicole hides in a small university town, convinced the mythological art collection at a local manor contains a final message from her mother. But before she can study it, Cian McCarter, the Wake's most skilled Imperial, arrives on his own hunt. When Nicole and Cian discover that Cian's prey has stolen a painting for leverage, they're forced to work together. Just going to add in a little note here. There is a lot of... This is another thing that I love, because Cian is Irish, and obviously they're in Cornwall, so there is a lot of Celtic inspiration in this as well. There's a lot of Celtic mythology and folklore mentioned. Continues. As the creature threatens to expose Nicole's powers, her tenuous alliance with Cian threatens her heart. If her true identity is revealed, Cian will hunt her next. No one disobeys the Wake and survives, especially when the art they're seeking unveils a conspiracy that would change the lives of creatures and humans forever. But Nicole may only be able to resist one, her wicked impulses or a love that could repaint her world. And after a life of hiding her true nature, who could resist the temptation of magic? I love it. It's so, so good. I think I've recommended this to absolutely everyone. And yeah, I can't say enough wonderful things about this book. But like I said, I really want to do a spotlight on Megan, because this is also her debut novel and it took her 12 years to get published, which is crazy to me because this book deserves the love that I'm seeing so many other books get and more. It's definitely not high up enough on people's radar, which is heartbreaking to me. And then going to go on to the final book, which is one I haven't read yet, but this is written by a Cornish author and it is set in Cornwall and based on Cornish folklore. Now, obviously you can get this everywhere, but it's called gorse, but gorse is a plant that is all over Cornwall. And actually, if you recognise the plant, it's actually, I don't know if that focused or not, it's actually, if you smell the yellow flowers, they have a vanilla-y, coconutty smell, fun fact, which you might not know. Now, I'm so excited to read this book. I'll read the synopsis for you, so there's not much I can say about this. But again, this is the 4th book in the last year that's been published that has been inspired by Cornwall, which I just think is lovely. Also, I'm just going to make a note of, even though I haven't read it, each... oh my god, we fell off the chair. Each chapter beginning is a different plant, and it has a little illustration of the plant, which I think is really cool because I haven't seen that before. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of showing this. God, I keep nearly falling off the chair. So the synopsis for this one is Cornwall 1786. For years the villagers of Meercombe have turned to their keeper, the old and battle-scarred Lord Pelagius Hunt, mediator between the worlds of men and fae, for help. But this is a time of change. Belief in the old ways in the Piskies and Spriggans has dimmed, kindled instead in the Reverend Cleaver's fiery pulpit. So I'm going to break again. This focuses on the sort of old pagan beliefs of Cornwall with the crossover of you know what I mean, Christianity coming to Cornwall, Christianisation, there we go, coming to Cornwall, which I've spoken about a lot in this video. Piskies and Spriggans has dimmed, kindled instead in the Reverend Cleaver's fiery pulpit. His church stands proud above the mere. God's name is whispered, hushed, loved, and now death stalks Meercombe, or Meercombe, on the moor. There are corpses in the heather, there is blood in the gorse. That gives me goosebumps, that bit. Nancy Bligh is determined to do what Pell will not, maintain the balance between the fae and the human world, be the keeper that he refuses to be. Blessed with natural sight, friend to Spriggans, Piskies and human locals of Meercombe, Nancy has power that Pell never had and never lets her use. But as Meercombe falls into darkness, perhaps her time has come. A poignant and lyrical examination of faith, love and grief, Gorse asks, what do we choose to believe and how does that shape who we are? So this is one I'm so looking forward to reading, and the second book actually got announced not long ago, and that's called Ragwort. But obviously I haven't got too much to say about that, other than the fact that I'm so excited to read that, and I'm very intrigued by it, and I just hope I love it as much as I want to and hope I'm going to. But yeah, I think that's it. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. It probably was all over the place, because my brain ends, especially if I'm excited, my brain ends up firing in every single direction. I forget things and whatnot. But I think that's everything that I wanted to cover in this, and it was more me making people aware of Cornish myth and folklore and the rich history that we have, rather than exactly replicating all of it in detail to you. It was more to give you that initial intrigue into this very, very magical county. But I hope you loved this video, and I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm sure I'll come up with something. But yeah, thank you again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.